Assalamu alaikum, let's explore this Islamic topic together. Hey, so, you know how we were talking about the Ottoman Empire the other day? Well, I was reading up on something fascinating, the influence of Sufi orders in the Balkans during that time. It's way more significant than you might initially think. Even within the broader cone of Islamic history. It's not just about religion. It's about how people lived, how communities formed, and how even today, you can still see echoes of that influence. Think about it. The Ottoman Empire was huge, incredibly diverse. You had people from all sorts of backgrounds, religions, and cultures living side by side. Islam, of course, was the dominant religion in many areas, but it wasn't a monolithic thing. It wasn't just a set of rules. It was a living, breathing faith interpreted and experienced in countless ways. And that's where the Sufi orders come in. Sufism, is the mystical branch of Islam. It's less about strict adherence to law and more about a direct, personal connection with God. Think of it as a more inward, spiritual path, a journey of self-discovery and closeness to the divine. These Sufi orders, or tariqas, weren't just abstract philosophical groups. They were vibrant, organized communities with their own hierarchies, rituals, and social structures. They played a huge role in spreading and shaping Islam across the Balkans. Imagine the Ottoman Empire expanding into the Balkans, a region already rich with its own histories and traditions. You didn't just have sudden conversions, it was a gradual. The Sufi orders were incredibly important in this because they offered something different. Something more approachable than perhaps the stricter interpretations of Islam. They were often at the forefront of spreading literacy and education, establishing schools and libraries, especially in rural areas. This wasn't just about religious instruction. They were teaching practical skills too, things that improved people's lives. Think about it, if you're a farmer in a remote village. A wandering Sufi teacher who can also teach you irrigation techniques or basic medicine is going to be far more appealing than an imposing figure enforcing strict religious laws. They became integral to the social fabric of the communities. These orders also played a crucial role in bridging cultural divides. They weren't always just aimed on converting people. They fostered a sense of community and belonging, bringing together people of different ethnic and religious backgrounds. They often emphasized tolerance and understanding, which was particularly important in such a diverse region. Think about the tekas, the lodges where the Sufi orders would meet. These were centers of social life, places where people could gather, share stories, receive spiritual guidance, and even find practical assistance. They became safe havens and places of refuge, sometimes even playing a role in mediating disputes. The most prominent Sufi orders in the Balkans varied from region to region. But some, like the Mevlevi, the whirling dervishes, the Qadiri, and the Naqshbandi, had a particularly strong presence and influence. Each order had its own unique practices and rituals, its own style of worship, and its own methods of spiritual guidance. These differences often led to rich interactions and even some friendly rivalry, a kind of competition to attract followers and spread their message. Think of the tekas as community hubs. They weren't just places of worship. They were often involved in charitable work, providing assistance to the poor and needy, organizing public works projects, and acting as social safety nets. This provided a practical benefit to the community, making the Sufi message more accessible and appealing. Now, it's not all rosy. Like any significant historical movement, the Sufi orders had their internal conflicts and faced challenges. There were periods of tension with more orthodox Islamic interpretations, and the political landscape of the Ottoman Empire constantly influenced their activities. The decline of the Ottoman Empire also impacted the Sufi orders, although their influence, even today, remains surprisingly strong in certain areas. Many of the traditions, the practices, and even the social structures they established remain embedded in the cultural fabric of the Balkans. So, the influence of Ottoman Sufi orders in the Balkans isn't just a historical footnote. It's a crucial piece of understanding the region's complex religious, social, and cultural development. It's a story of how religion wasn't just about dogma but about how people lived, connected, and built communities, a human story as much as a religious one. It's a story about adaptation, tolerance, and the lasting power of spiritual traditions in shaping the world around them. And that's why it's so fascinating to learn about, don't you think? Hey, so, you want to know about the Ottoman Sufi orders and their impact on the Balkans? It's a fascinating story, really. Imagine this. It's the 14th and 15th centuries. The Ottoman Empire is expanding rapidly across the Balkans, think modern-day Greece, Albania, Serbia, Bulgaria, parts of Romania. You get the picture. It's not just about conquering lands. It's about integrating diverse populations, many of whom are Christian Orthodox. This is where the Sufi orders come in, playing a surprisingly significant role in the social fabric. At first, it wasn't a massive, organized, top-down plan. It wasn't like the Ottomans said, "Okay, everyone, convert to Islam through these Sufi guys." No, it started much more organically. Think of it like seeds scattered on fertile ground. Individual Sufi sheikhs, spiritual leaders, began traveling, establishing tekas, monasteries or lodges, and attracting followers, both Muslims and non-Muslims. These weren't your typical, stern religious figures. Sufi orders, at their heart, emphasized a mystical path to God, often through music, poe, and ecstatic rituals. Think whirling dervishes. The visual imagery alone was captivating, drawing people in. They offered a different kind of religious experience, one that appealed to those searching for a deeper connection with the divine. This was a particularly potent draw in a society undergoing immense change, where traditional hierarchies were being disrupted by the arrival of a new power. For many, the Sufi tekas were places of refuge and community. They offered education, healthcare, and social services, often bridging the gap between different communities. A poor peasant, regardless of their religious background, might find food and shelter in a teki, receive medical attention from the sheikh, or simply find solace in the shared rituals and spiritual practices. This built trust and loyalty, even among those who remained Christians or practiced other faiths. The emphasis on tolerance and inclusivity was key. Sufi sheikhs weren't necessarily pushing for forced conversions. While the of Islamization certainly happened in the Balkans, it was often gradual and deeply influenced by Sufi teachings, on personal experience rather than strict adherence to dogma. Many Christians found the Sufi emphasis on compassion and inner peace resonated with their own spiritual beliefs. They might attend the text ceremonies, participate in its charitable works, and even adopt some Sufi practices without fully converting to Islam. However, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The various Sufi orders had their own internal power struggles, and not all sheikhs were equally tolerant or charitable. The influence of Sufi orders varied across the Balkan regions. Some areas saw a massive influx of Sufi influence, while others remained relatively untouched. Local politics and existing social structures also played a major role in shaping the acceptance and integration of these orders. One of the interesting aspects was the role of the tekkes as centers of learning. They weren't just spiritual centers. They often became important places of education, offering instruction in various subjects like law, medicine, and even arts. This helped spread literacy and knowledge among the population, regardless of their religious affiliation. Many of these tekkes attracted scholars and thinkers, turning them into hubs of intellectual activity within the region. This had a profound influence on the region's cultural and intellectual landscape. Imagine the impact, a blending of Islamic scholarship with existing local knowledge and traditions. Think of the rich musical traditions of the Balkans. For instance, Sufi practices heavily emphasized music and poetry as paths to spiritual enlightenment. This interaction with pre-existing musical traditions of the region could have contributed to the beautiful musical fusions we hear today. The influence spread beyond just religion and education. It touched many aspects of Balkan life. So, in the early stages, the Ottoman Sufi order's influence in the Balkans wasn't a forceful imposition, but a more subtle, organic. It was a weaving together of different strands, religious practices, social structures, and cultural traditions, creating a tapes far richer than its individual threads. It's a complex narrative, full of nuance and contradiction. But it's one that reveals much about the dynamics of power, culture, and religious exchange during a pivotal period in Balkan history. It's a story of gradual integration, mutual influence, and sometimes, surprising levels of coexistence. And that's only the beginning of the story, of course. There's so much more to explore. Hey, so we were talking about the Ottoman Empire, right? And how vast and diverse it was. Well, let's dive a little deeper into something really fascinating. The influence of Sufi orders in the Balkans. It's a bit of a wild ride. Honestly, full of religious fervor, political intrigue, and surprisingly, a lot of social change. We're not talking about the top-down, official Islam imposed by the Sultan and his governors. Think more about the grassroots level, the everyday lives of people. Sufism, remember, is a mystical branch of Islam, all about a direct, personal connection with God. They weren't just interested in rigid rules. They emphasized inner spiritual transformation, love, and compassion. And these Sufi orders, basically like religious brotherhoods, played a huge role in shaping Balkan society, especially during the middle period of Ottoman rule. Say, from roughly the 15th to the 18th centuries. Imagine this. You're a villager in, say, present-day Bosnia or Albania. Under Ottoman rule, life is tough. You might be a farmer, a craftsman, maybe even a trader. You are probably dealing with taxes, potential conflicts with your neighbors, maybe even the occasional bandit attack. But then, a *techie* appears, a Sufi lodge, a center for spiritual practice. It's a place of refuge, a sanctuary. It's where the local dervish, a Sufi practitioner, leads prayers, offers spiritual guidance, and dispenses wisdom. These *tekkes* weren't just prayer halls, though they were community hubs. Dervishes often acted as mediators in disputes, offering a neutral space for conflict resolution. This was huge. They weren't part of the formal Ottoman legal system, but they wielded a lot of informal power, based purely on their respect within the community. Sometimes, they even helped with practical matters, organizing irrigation projects, providing education, or offering medical assistance. They were often the most literate people in the village. able to read and write Arabic and Persian, giving them a distinct advantage in a largely illiterate society. Different Sufi orders had different approaches. 2. Some were known for their ecstatic rituals. Whirling dervishes famous for their mesmerizing dances, designed to achieve a state of spiritual union with God. Others emphasized quiet contemplation and devotion. These differences, though, didn't necessarily lead to conflict. In fact, they often coexisted, sometimes even cooperating on projects that benefited the whole community. Now, this wasn't always a harmonious picture. The relationship between Sufi orders and the Ottoman state itself was complex. While the Sultan generally tolerated them, sometimes even patronized them, there were periods of tension. The state, after all, was interested in maintaining order and control, while Sufi orders sometimes operated outside of that official structure, building their own networks of influence. Think of it like a delicate dance. Cooperation and competition happening simultaneously. But the interesting thing is how these Sufi orders bridged cultural divides. The Balkans, as you know, were incredibly diverse. Orthodox Christians, Catholics, Jews, and Muslims all lived alongside each other. Sufi orders, with their emphasis on spiritual experience over rigid dogma, often found common ground with people of different faiths. While not promoting religious syncretism, mixing religions, they fostered a degree of tolerance and mutual understanding. This wasn't always the case, of course, but it was significant in creating a space for interfaith dialogue and cooperation, at least on a local level. Furthermore, the Sufi order's influence extended beyond the purely religious sphere. They often played a vital role in education, establishing schools, *mektebs*, that taught not only religious but also secular subjects like mathematics, astronomy, and literature. This contributed to the intellectual and cultural life of the Balkan communities, regardless of their religious affiliation. This education fostered a broader understanding of the world and promoted literacy, skills that would be valuable in all aspects of life. The decline of the Ottoman Empire eventually impacted the Sufi orders, too. As the empire weakened, their influence waned, and with the rise of nationalism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the emphasis shifted towards ethnic and religious identities, sometimes leading to conflict between different communities. The *tekus* became less central to everyday life. However, their legacy remains. The impact of Sufi orders on Balkan society is visible even today. In the architecture of the remaining *tekus*, in the cultural traditions, and even in the values of tolerance and community that still resonate in many Balkan societies. It's a complex story, a story of both harmony and conflict, cooperation and competition, but it's a crucial piece of the puzzle in understanding the rich and multifaceted history of the Balkans. So yeah, that's a glimpse into the middle chapters of this fascinating story. There's so much more we could explore, but this should give you a good starting point. What do you think? Want to explore another aspect of Ottoman history? Hey, so we've been talking about the Ottoman Sufi orders in the Balkans, right? Amazing stuff, how they wove themselves into the very fabric of society. But how did it all end? It wasn't a sudden switch off, more like a slow fade. A gradual unraveling, really. Think of it less like a final chapter and more like the last act of a long, complex play. The 19th century was a turning point. The Ottoman Empire itself was weakening, fracturing under the pressure of nationalism, internal revolts, and European powers constantly poking their noses in. This instability had a huge impact on the Sufi orders. For centuries, they'd thrived under a relatively tolerant, though certainly not always harmonious, system. The sultans often saw them as a useful tool for social control, a way to maintain order and a sense of shared identity across diverse populations. The Sufis, in turn, often enjoyed a degree of autonomy, building their tekkes, lodges, attracting followers, and influencing local life. But as the empire weakened, that tolerance started to wane. Secularizing forces within the Ottoman government, influenced by European ideas, began viewing the Sufi orders with suspicion. They were seen as potentially subversive pockets of independent power that didn't necessarily align with the increasingly centralized, modernizing vision of the state. Think of it like this: the old, established order was being challenged by a new, more centralized power. The Sufis, with their decentralized structure and close ties to local communities, became a target. This didn't happen overnight. Of course, it wasn't a systematic purge, but more of a slow erosion of their influence and power. Some orders were officially suppressed, their tekkes closed down. Others faced increased scrutiny and limitations on their activities. The vibrant social and religious life centered around the tekkes, the dhikr ceremonies, the teaching of Sufism, the provision of social services, all started to decline. Then you have the rise of nationalism. As different Balkan nations began to assert their independence from Ottoman rule, they often targeted the Sufi orders as symbols of Ottoman authority and influence. It wasn't just a religious thing, it was about national identity. The tekkes, which had once been seen as unifying centers, now became perceived as obstacles to the creation of separate, independent national identities. Imagine if, during a major political upheaval in your own religious groups were suddenly viewed with suspicion because of their connections to a previous regime. What happened? Another factor was the growing influence of more conservative, orthodox interpretations of Islam. Some of these interpretations saw the Sufi traditions, with their emphasis on mystical experience and diverse practices, as heretical or even dangerous. This internal conflict within Islam further weakened the Sufi order's position. It wasn't simply secular authorities cracking down. The very foundation of their acceptance was being challenged from within. However, the story isn't entirely one of decline and disappearance. While many tekkes were closed, and the open practice of Sufism diminished, the influence of Sufi orders didn't completely vanish. Many traditions and practices persisted, albeit often in a more discreet, less public manner. The spiritual legacy of the Sufi orders lived on, often integrated into local customs and beliefs. Even within the new national identities emerging in the Balkans. Think of it like an underground current, continuing to flow even after the visible river has been diverted. You still find echoes of Sufi thought and practice in the Balkans today. Certain musical styles, storytelling traditions, and even aspects of local culture still show the indelible mark of centuries of Sufi influence. It's woven into the very fabric of the region, much like the threads of a finely woven tapes. You might not see the original design clearly, but if you look closely, you can still discern its influence. So, to answer your question directly, the conclusion of Ottoman Sufi order's influence in the Balkans wasn't a sharp end, but a complex transformation. A gradual decline spurred by political upheaval, shifting religious landscapes, and the rise of nationalism, but also a subtle persistence, a lingering presence in the cultural DNA of the region. Their vibrant history continues to resonate, a testament to their profound impact on the Balkans, even if it's a quieter echo now. Hey, so, we were talking about the Ottomans the other day, right? And I got thinking about the Sufi orders and their huge impact on Balkan society during that time. It's really fascinating, and actually, it teaches us a lot even today. It's not just dusty history books. It's about real people, real beliefs, and how they shaped the whole region. Imagine the Balkans under Ottoman rule, a melting pot of cultures, religions, and languages. It wasn't always a picnic, of course, but the Sufi orders played a surprisingly unifying role, especially for the Muslim population. These weren't just religious institutions. They were social hubs, centers of learning, and even, in some ways, political players. Think of it like this. Islam, as it arrived in the Balkans, wasn't a monolithic thing. You had different schools of thought, different interpretations of the Quran, and different ways of practicing the faith. The Sufi orders, with their emphasis on mystical experience and direct connection with God, offered a kind of alternative path. They weren't necessarily challenging mainstream Islam, but they provided a different flavor, a more personal and emotionally resonant approach. Many Sufi orders emphasized a very tolerant and inclusive worldview. They saw the divine everywhere, in nature, in art, in music, even in other religions. This wasn't necessarily syncretism, a blending of religions, but more of a recognition of a divine spark in everything. They weren't just on the strict legal aspects of Islam, like Sharia law, but also on the inner spiritual journey, the path towards personal enlightenment. This approach resonated deeply with people, regardless of their background. The orders attracted people from all walks of life. You had wealthy patrons, farmers, artisans, scholars, a real cross-section of society. The tekkes, which were their lodges or monasteries, became community centers. They offered not only spiritual guidance but also education, medical care, and even dispute resolution. Think of them as a kind of one-stop shop for community needs. All wrapped up in a mystical, spiritually enriching environment. The music, the the ecstatic dances, all were part of the Sufi experience. These weren't just random activities. They were seen as paths to connect with the divine, to transcend the everyday and reach a state of spiritual unity. This artistic expression had a huge cultural impact, influencing Balkan music, and architecture for centuries. Even today, you can see echoes of that influence in the region's cultural landscape. Now, it wasn't all rosy. Like any large institution, the Sufi orders had internal power struggles, political intrigues, and even instances of corruption. But their overall impact on Balkan society was undeniably significant, shaping social norms, fostering tolerance, at least to a degree, and promoting a vibrant cultural exchange. So, what does this teach Muslims today? Well, I think there are several key takeaways. Firstly, it highlights the importance of spiritual depth and personal connection with God. The emphasis on inner transformation, on cultivating a loving and compassionate heart, is something that resonates deeply with many Muslims today, regardless of their specific theological viewpoint. Secondly, it shows the importance of community and social engagement. The Sufi orders demonstrate how religious institutions can be more than just places of worship. They can be active agents of social change, providing crucial services and fostering a sense of belonging. We see that echoed today in many Muslim communities worldwide, where mosques and other religious organizations play a vital role in community support and outreach. Thirdly, It underlines the value of cultural exchange and tolerance. Although the Ottoman Empire had its flaws, the relative tolerance fostered by certain Sufi orders reminds us that religious difference doesn't have to lead to conflict. Learning to appreciate and understand different cultures and beliefs can lead to greater harmony and cooperation. Finally, it reminds us that the Islamic faith is rich and diverse. There isn't one single, monolithic, Islamic way of life. The Sufi tradition reminds us of the diverse paths one can take on their spiritual journey. It's a reminder that the essence of faith is found not just in adherence to strict rules, but in the genuine pursuit of closeness to God, however that manifests itself. So, the influence of Ottoman Sufi orders on Balkan society is a complex and fascinating topic. It's a story of religious fervor, social interaction, cultural blending, and political intrigue all rolled into one. And while it's a piece of history, the lessons it teaches about spiritual growth, community building, tolerance, and the diversity within Islam remain incredibly relevant to Muslims today. It's something to ponder and learn from. Goodbye, may Allah bless us all. That's our discussion for today.